I slid the document across the mahogany Easter dinner table. I watched my father David, his face turn white. My brother Caleb dropped his silver fork and it clattered against the china. Their entire perfect old money Boston world built on status and lies was about to shatter. See, 10 months earlier, my grandfather Arthur died. He left behind an estate worth $1.5 million. My brother got everything. I got nothing. But I had just found what they buried. And the question was, is reclaiming the truth worth destroying your entire family? To understand what happened, you have to understand my family. We weren't just wealthy. We were Cambridge wealthy. Old money. Our family name was etched into library wings and museum plaques. My father David was a senior partner at a prestigious law firm. He wasn't obsessed with money. He was obsessed with legacy, with the idea of our family. And in his eyes, that legacy had one heir, my older brother Caleb. Caleb was everything I wasn't. He was a flashy real estate broker, loud, charming, and had my father's ruthless streak. He was the golden child. I was Eliza, the quiet one, the historian and archivist, the scapegoat. My entire life was a master class in contrast. When Caleb graduated from Harvard, my father threw a party with 200 guests. A string quartet played on the lawn. My mother Susan floated around in a new dress, beaming. When I graduated with my master's degree summa cum laude, we went to a quiet, stuffy restaurant. Just the four of us. My father spent the entire dinner on his phone discussing a new property Caleb was trying to flip. He congratulated me with a distracted handshake. This wasn't simple favoritism. It was something deeper. I learned later in therapy about the dynamic of the golden child and the scapegoat. It happens in families ruled by a narcissist. The parent, my father, sees the golden child as an extension of their own idealized self. Caleb was his ambition, his confidence, his public face. The scapegoat that was me exists to carry all the things the parent despises in themselves. My father, despite his bravado, was deeply insecure about his own father, my grandfather Arthur, who was a self-made engineer, not an Ivy League lawyer. My quiet nature, my love for history, my lack of interest in corporate law or real estate, he saw all of that as Arthur's weakness. He saw it as his weakness. And so he had to crush it in me. I wasn't just overlooked. I was a living reminder of the part of himself he hated. Caleb was given a 6-figure salary right out of college to manage family properties. I was told to find an apartment and pay my own student loans because, as my father said, history doesn't pay the bills, Eliza. It's time you faced reality. I learned to live in the shadows, to make myself smaller, to expect nothing, because expecting nothing hurt less than the constant grinding disappointment. I orbited their perfect world, but I was never, ever a part of it. There was one person who saw me, my grandfather Arthur. He was my mother's father, a self-made engineer, not a Beacon Hill lawyer. He was gruff and practical and completely unimpressed by my father's obsession with legacy. While my father collected status, Arthur collected books. His library was my sanctuary. It was filled with rare first editions maps and his priceless antique collection of Boston history books. He and I were the only ones who understood their value. We'd spend hours in that dusty, sunlit room, and he'd let me handle books worth thousands of dollars. He'd tap the leather binding of a 17th century ledger and say, "Eliza, don't let their noise drown out your own history. Your story is worth just as much." When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, I was the one who showed up. I took leave from my job at the archive. I sat with him, read to him from his own collection, and held his hand. Caleb visited twice. Both times he took a selfie for Instagram and left after 10 minutes. My father David only came to discuss the estate and ensure Arthur's affairs were in order. When he died, the grief was a physical weight. I felt like the only light in my life had been extinguished. The will reading was 2 weeks later in a sterile downtown law office. I sat there numb, just hoping for a small token. Maybe his reading glasses, or even just one of the history books. The lawyer read through the document. The house, the stocks, the savings, totaling $1.5 million. And to my grandson Caleb, the lawyer finished, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including my personal effects and my complete library collection. I stopped breathing. Nothing. Not a dollar, not a photograph, not a single book. I looked at my father. He was nodding, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. My mother Susan just stared at her hands in her lap. In the parking garage afterward, I finally found my voice. I asked my father why. Why would Arthur do that to me? My father didn't even stop walking. He just adjusted his briefcase and said, "Caleb has a family connections. He understands legacy. You don't." He said it like I was a child asking a stupid question. I went home. I didn't eat for 3 days. I called in sick to work. This was the moment I fell into what my therapist later called the resignation trap. It wasn't about the money. I'd never expected the money. It was about the books. It was about the fact that the one person I thought truly saw me, my only ally, had in his final act confirmed what my family always believed: I was invisible. I was worthless. It's a terrible psychological state, learned helplessness. When you've been told you don't matter for so long, you eventually start to believe it. I didn't get angry. I got numb. I resigned myself to the fact that I deserved nothing. The betrayal wasn't that they had won. The betrayal was that my grandfather, the last good man I knew, had agreed with them. I started to believe I had done something wrong, that I was in the end just not worth remembering. Caleb didn't just spend the money, he performed it. Within 3 weeks, he'd closed on a $3.5 million penthouse overlooking the Charles River. His Instagram, which had always been an obnoxious highlight reel of his blessed life, went into overdrive. There were pictures of the new kitchen, all marble and stainless steel, pictures of the floor-to-ceiling windows, pictures from a spontaneous $40,000 ski trip to Aspen, him and his wife laughing with champagne, # legacy. Family gatherings, of course, moved to his penthouse. My father David would stand by the window, glass of whiskey in hand, beaming with a pride so intense it was sickening. He'd clap Caleb on the back, telling anyone who would listen, "The boy knows how to handle a legacy. He understands lineage." My mother Susan would just smile and pass around appetizers, her face frozen in that perfect, placid mask of denial. "Isn't it wonderful," she'd say, avoiding my eyes. So happy for them. I went to one of those parties. I stood in the corner, invisible as always, and watched Caleb hold court. He was drunk loud, telling some story about a new investment. He looked right at me, smirked, and said, "Don't worry, Eliza. I'll save you a spot in my guest room." My father laughed. I stopped going. I stopped answering their calls. I retreated back into my numbness, into that gray fog of resignation. I was just waiting for the pain to stop feeling like a fresh wound. Then, about 2 months after the will reading, Caleb posted a new photo. It wasn't a party. It was a picture taken inside our grandfather's house, which was now Caleb's, of course. He was cleaning out the past, as his caption said, to make way for the future. The photo was of a large cardboard box. Piled inside, haphazardly spine up, spine down, was my grandfather's priceless antique book collection. My books, our books. And scrawled on the side of the box in Caleb's sharp arrogant handwriting were 2 words, old junk. I stared at the photo. I zoomed in on the cover of a 17th century Boston ledger. I recognized the one Arthur and I had spent an entire afternoon translating. It was jammed in beside a tacky fantasy novel. Old junk. The gray fog of my grief didn't just lift. It evaporated. It was replaced by something bright and hot and sharp. It was rage. A cold, clean, calculated rage. Because my grandfather, the man who taught me the difference between a first edition and a reprint, the man who handled those books with cotton gloves, would never have called them old junk. And the man who loved me, the only man who ever really saw me, would never have given his most prized possession to someone who would defile it. He wouldn't have done it. That's when I knew. My grief had blinded me. I'd been so lost in the pain of his betrayal that I never stopped to question it. He didn't betray me. He was betrayed. I got up from my couch, my hands shaking, but not from sadness. I went to my computer and typed "Best Estate Litigation Lawyers in Boston." I wasn't looking for a family friend. I was looking for a shark. Her name was Rebecca Stone. Her website was minimalist and brutal. No smiling photos. Just a list of multi-million-dollar probate cases she had won. Her reputation was that she didn't just win, she annihilated. I used the last of my savings to pay for the initial consultation. I sat in her steel and glass office, feeling small. I told her everything. I told her about David, the narcissistic lawyer. I told her about Caleb, the golden child. And I told her about me, the scapegoat. I told her about the will reading and my father's satisfied nod. Rebecca Stone just listened, her face impassive. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "So you have no proof," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said, my voice quiet, "just a feeling. And this." I showed her the Instagram post on my phone. She glanced at it. "He's an idiot, but being an idiot isn't a crime. A feeling and a picture of a box won't win in probate court, Eliza." "My father is a lawyer," I insisted, leaning forward. "He's obsessed with control. He handled everything. He dismissed my grandfather's longtime lawyer and hired a new firm just weeks before Arthur died. Doesn't that seem strange?" Rebecca was silent for a long moment. I could see her mind working, connecting the dots. She saw the pattern. The narcissistic father, the sudden change in lawyers, the complete erasure of one heir. She finally nodded once. "That is interesting." She agreed to take the case. She told me not to get my hopes up, but I saw something in her eyes. She smelled it. The one thing that lawyers like my father fear: probate fraud. Rebecca Stone started digging. She was a ghost. She moved through probate records, financial statements, and law firms. Her first call was to my grandfather's old lawyer, the one David had fired. He was elderly offended by his dismissal and very willing to talk. He confirmed that Arthur's original will, the one from 10 years prior, had in fact been a 50-50 split. The next call was to the hospice nurse who had cared for Arthur in his final weeks. Rebecca called me a week later. "I spoke to the nurse," she said, her voice clipped. "She remembers you. She also remembers your father visiting frequently. Alone. She said your grandfather was agitated, that he kept asking for his old lawyer." "My father probably said he was confused," I murmured, the sickness rising in my throat. "He did," Rebecca said, "but the nurse didn't buy it. She thought David was the problem. So the last time he visited, she did something." My heart was pounding. "What?" "She stayed in the room. She said she was organizing his medications. And she turned on the voice recorder on her phone. She sent me the file an hour ago." There was a click, as Rebecca played the audio file. First, I heard my father's smooth, condescending voice. "Dad, we've been over this. Everything is handled. Caleb will take care of the legacy." Then I heard another voice. It was thin, papery, and weak, but it was him. It was Arthur, and he was furious. "No," Arthur rasped. "You handled nothing. Eliza, she's the only one." "Dad, you're tired." "I'm not tired." His voice cracked, but the strength was there. "I want it 50-50. Eliza and Caleb, 50-50. And the books are for Eliza. This is my final word, David. My final word." The recording ended. I sat there frozen, the hot tears streaming down my face. This wasn't grief. It was vindication. "He sent this to his old lawyer, Rebecca," continued her voice cold as ice. "David received a copy of this audio file via email with a timestamp. 2 days later, he fired that lawyer and hired the new firm. He submitted the old invalid will to the probate court, the one that left you nothing. He signed a document under oath swearing it was the only and final will." I wiped my face, the rage now, perfectly terrifyingly calm. "He buried it," I whispered. "He did more than that," Rebecca said. "He committed perjury. He committed felony probate fraud. Eliza, we have him. We chose Easter Sunday for the confrontation, the holiday of rebirth." The irony was bitter, and I savored it. I hadn't seen my family in months. When I walked into my father's house, the air was thick with the smell of roasted lamb and hyacinths. The table was perfectly set. Caleb was there louder than ever, bragging about his penthouse. My father David was at the head of the table, holding a glass of wine, looking every bit the proud patriarch of a Boston dynasty. My mother Susan saw me and rushed over her face a mask of anxious relief. "Eliza, you came. We've missed you so much." I just smiled. I wouldn't miss it. Saturday, I made small talk. I listened as Caleb talked about refinancing the penthouse. I even complimented my father on the wine. I was perfectly calm. My therapist and I had rehearsed this moment. I wasn't there as the scapegoat. I was there as an executor. Finally, David raised his glass. "A toast," he said, beaming at Caleb, "to family, to those who understand legacy, and to the wisdom of knowing who to trust with that responsibility." I felt the familiar cold knot in my stomach, but this time it wasn't pain. It was power. I let the silence settle after their amens. Then I cleared my throat. "Speaking of legacy, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet, "I found something of Grandpa Arthur's, something I think you both need to see." The atmosphere shifted. Caleb frowned. My father's smile tightened. "Eliza, this is hardly the time," my mother started. "No, I think this is the perfect time," I said. I texted Rebecca. She had been waiting in her car down the street. 30 seconds later, the doorbell rang. My mother, confused, went to get it. Rebecca Stone walked in wearing a sharp black suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Her heels clicked like gunshots on the hardwood floor. "Who in God's name is this?" David said, standing up. "This," I said, "is my lawyer, Rebecca Stone." I slid the document across the table, the one from the hook. It landed in front of my father. His face went white. My brother Caleb leaned over, read the first page, and dropped his silver fork. It clattered against the china. "What the hell is this?" Caleb whispered, the color draining from his face. Rebecca Stone spoke, her voice devastatingly calm. "That is a copy of Arthur's second will, The legal final will, notarized and witnessed by his hospice nurse, dated 2 weeks before his death. David started to bluster. This is outrageous. It's Easter. You bring this ambulance chaser into my home. Rebecca cut him off. The will you submitted to probate court, she said, ignoring his outburst, was revoked. You were made aware of this second will. You had a legal fiduciary duty to file the most recent one. She then slid a second paper across the table, a certified transcript of the audio recording. And this, she said, is the evidence that you knew. I watched my father's eyes scan the page, reading his own words, reading Arthur's final furious command. 50-50. This is my final word. The room was completely silent. This is fake, Caleb stammered, looking at my father. Dad, this is fake, right? Statute of limitations, something. This, Rebecca said, is probate fraud, Mr. David, a felony, compounded by perjury for swearing under oath that only one will existed. We also have the email you sent to your previous lawyer attempting to bury this. My mother, Susan, finally looked up, her hand over her mouth. She was staring at my father, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. David, she whispered. David, tell me you didn't know. Tell me this is a mistake. My father just stared at the paper. His silence was the only answer she needed. Rebecca Stone delivered the ultimatum. You have 2 options. Option 1, we settle tonight. Caleb returns the full inheritance plus interest and damages, totaling $920,000 via wire transfer within 48 hours. In return, Eliza will not press criminal charges. And option 2, my father said, his voice barely a whisper. Option 2, Rebecca said, snapping her briefcase shut, is that at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, I file this audio, recording the email and the witness testimony with the Massachusetts Bar Association and the District Attorney's Office. You will be disbarred, David, and you will both face criminal prosecution. Caleb's wife started to cry a high-pitched, ugly sound. Caleb looked at me, his eyes wild with panic and hate. You're doing this over money. You are destroying this family. I looked right back at him. My voice was cold. No, Caleb, I said, you already did that. I'm just turning on the lights. The implosion was immediate. It was absolute. My father signed the settlement agreement right there on the Easter dinner table, his hand shaking so violently he could barely form his name. Caleb didn't say a word. He just stared at the audio transcript, his face, a mask of gray disbelief. Caleb's wife, however, was not silent. She stood up, threw her linen napkin onto her plate of untouched lamb, and looked at her husband. You stole it, she hissed. My home. She walked out. She filed for divorce the next day. Caleb was forced to panic sell the penthouse. In the flooded Boston luxury market, a panic sale is a bloodbath. He lost hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get the cash to pay me. The life he had built, the life that was supposed to be his, evaporated in less than a week. But the fatal blow wasn't for Caleb, it was for my father. David, in his arrogance, must have thought I would stop at the money, that I wouldn't dare to destroy his legacy. He was wrong. The money was just the transaction. The audio file was the justice. Rebecca Stone, true to her word, forwarded the recording and the email chain to the Massachusetts Bar Association. The investigation was swift. The evidence was irrefutable. A lawyer, an officer of the court, knowingly submitting a false will and committing perjury. It was the end of his career. My father wasn't just fired. He was disbarred, humiliated. For a man like David, who had built his entire identity on his status as a pillar of the Boston legal community, this was worse than prison. It was erasure. His name was whispered at the country club, not with respect, but with pity and disgust. His old money friends, the ones he had cultivated for decades, crossed the street to avoid him. The legacy he was so obsessed with was now a permanent stain of disgrace. And my mother, Susan, the great peacemaker, the woman who had spent her entire life choosing polite silence over messy truth. She had hitched her entire existence to my father's status. When his status vanished, so did she. She was left with nothing. No money, no social standing. The same women she hosted for tea parties now pretended she didn't exist. She was socially bankrupt. She had chosen the side of the abuser, and when the abuser fell, he dragged her right down with him. The house, the center of their perfect Cambridge world, went into foreclosure. The whole rotten, beautiful facade had finally completely collapsed. The wire transfer for $920,000 hit my account 48 hours later. I stared at the number. I didn't feel happy. I didn't celebrate. I just breathed. It was the first full, deep breath I'd taken in 10 months. It felt like the relief, the quiet after a long, violent storm. I didn't stay in Boston. There was nothing left for me there but ghosts. I moved to Portland, Maine. I found a small, sunlit apartment in the West End. With a portion of the money, I opened a small, private archival office. My specialty is helping old families preserve their histories, their letters, their legacies, the real ones, not the fake ones. My grandfather's antique book collection sits on shelves. I built myself in my own office. They are safe. They are respected. That is my inheritance. About 6 months after I moved, I received a thick, cream-colored envelope in the mail. It was from the Boston Heritage Foundation, the most exclusive historical society in the city. I opened it, confused. It wasn't a request for a donation. It was a letter informing me that, according to the second and final will of Arthur, I was not only his financial heir, I was his social heir. He had bequeathed me his seat on the foundation's board of directors. My blood ran cold. This was the one thing my father David had coveted his entire life. A seat on that board was the pinnacle of old money Boston, the ultimate symbol of legacy. Arthur had given it to me. I attended my first board meeting the next month, in a room older than the country itself, and as we reviewed the new applications for membership, I saw a name I recognized. Susan, my mother. She was desperately trying to claw her way back into the world that had discarded her using the only avenue she thought she had left. Her application was weak, full of references to a life she no longer lived. I looked at her name on the paper, and I felt nothing. No anger, no desire for revenge, just a profound, quiet pity. This is what my therapist and I had talked about. Releasing bloodlines, finding yourself. We're taught that family is everything, that blood is the bond that can never be broken. But some bloodlines are toxic. They don't nurture, they poison. They demand you stay small so they can feel big. My family was broken long before I filed that lawsuit. It was a beautiful, expensive house with a rotten foundation. I didn't destroy it. I just stopped pretending the foundation wasn't crumbling. I refused to be silent. I chose to save myself instead of sinking with them. I recused myself from the vote, of course. I left the meeting and walked back to the train station, heading home to Maine. I remembered Arthur's voice in his library all those years ago. Don't let their noise drown out your own history, Eliza. I finally had. My history was my own. So, what would you have done? Would you have kept the toxic peace to keep a family that didn't see you? Or would you have burned it all down to find the truth and yourself? Let me know in the comments.